Winning the contract gets you the opportunity. Contract execution, it determines whether you make money, maintain compliance, keep the customer satisfied, and position yourself for future opportunities. I've seen companies spend months pursuing work only to struggle once the project begins. They lack the systems, the structure, and project management processes needed to execute successfully. Today, I want to discuss the key project management processes that drive successful contract execution, and then some of the common mistakes contractors make after the award. Now, if you're new here, hi, I'm Felicia. I help construction companies and contractors win and successfully execute government contracts by improving how they plan, manage, and deliver projects, from pre-award strategy to post-award execution and performance. If that's your goal, make sure you subscribe. Also, let me just tell you, you can go ahead and grab the contract execution readiness checklist, and it will get you on your way to seeing what gaps you may have in those key areas as you move forward in your business as a contractor. And I'll put the link down below in the description. All right, so now let's get into it. Contract execution is everything that happens after the contract award. It's the process of managing people, resources, schedules, budgets, documentation, compliance requirements, and project performance, all to ensure that the project is delivered successfully. Many contractors you find spending a lot of time on winning contracts, being awarded contracts, but they spend very little time preparing for execution. And that's where the problem begins. Once you're awarded the contract, the first thing that should take place is your kickoff. So you should have a kickoff meeting as well as planning, right? Those two go hand in hand. And this is before any work gets started. All the key players that's on your team should all have an understanding of these things I'm getting ready to share with you. The contract requirements. Some of the requirements that everyone on the team should know is definitely: when does the contract start? The location of the contract. And when you get into these larger contracts for my construction people, you know how if you're doing, let's say, complete design build, well, you know you're going to hit all of the phases and all of the divisions within construction, right? So everyone in the team that's going to be performing some of that work, whether it's internally or externally, whether you have subs, whether you're teaming with another company, they all need to know the contract requirements as it relates to their work. Now, you as the prime, you need to know the contract requirements across the board for the complete project. But you want to make sure, for example, if you're bringing in an electrician, they need to know the requirements as it relates to the work that they're going to perform, as it relates to their scope of work, okay? Also, everyone needs to know any compliance requirements that may be in place, okay? Because if you have to adhere to those contract compliance requirements, they should as well. And so in essence, any other contract requirements that you have to adhere to, you want to make sure you're rolling down those same requirements within your subcontractor agreements and your teaming agreements. They need to clearly understand their scope of work. Okay, what will they be performing? You know, where they're going to perform, where does it fall within the schedule, right? Because we know we can't put windows in without the foundation set. So they need to know their timeline for when they're supposed to come in and perform their work, but also having a clear understanding of the work that they're going to perform within that scope. If they're having to supply materials and things like that, they need to know what the material requirements are. Maybe, the agency says, we don't like this particular manufacturer, so don't use them. Well, you need to let your subcontractors know that they can't use that particular manufacturer. So within the scope, they need to know, of course, the work they're going to perform, any materials and things like that is required as well. Deliverables. Okay, what does that look like? Okay, within your scope, what are your deliverables? What things do you have to bring as an end result? If they want I don't know, 5 windows, then you need to make sure you have 5 windows in the building, right? So you want to make sure you're hitting those deliverables as well. And again, whoever has any part within those deliverables, they need to know what they are as well. And then your schedule requirements. Again, as the prime, you need to know the complete schedule, okay? The whole layout. And if you're using a project manager, a superintendent, they definitely need to know the schedule as well. And then your subcontractors, teaming partners, as they're going to come in and do their portion of the work, they need to know that schedule timeline as well as when you anticipate them coming on to do their work. And you have to be also mindful of things happen. You know, when we're talking complete design build, when you're working outside, the elements can have a factor on your schedule. So one, you have to plan for that. Okay, whole different conversation. But you also want to make sure you're relaying that to your other parties that's going to be providing their scope of work. Okay, so you want to make sure they know the schedule. And then any schedule changes that come up, you need to notify them immediately of that so that they can just adjust their schedule accordingly as well. Because remember, they're probably not just working on your project. The next thing is reporting obligations. What reports do they need to submit to you? What reports do you need to submit to your customer? You want to make sure you're submitting all of the documentation, all of the paperwork. For example, some agencies, when you submit your invoice, they like to see the backup. Okay, what is that? Hours worked. Well, how do you get that? If it was an electrical company doing some of the work, then they have to provide their hours of work, right? If they're paying guys to do the work, then you need their payroll as well. So they need to bring payroll. It may even require certified payroll. And if that's the case, then you want to make sure you do that. If it's where AIA documents are required, you want to make sure they're submitting their AI documents. And then in turn, you're going to submit yours. So you just want to make sure, again, as it relates to the scope of work, they're providing their documentation, and then you're going to put together the complete packet of all the documentation, including yours as the prime contractor, into whatever reporting requirements that you have. Other reporting obligations I just want to throw in here real quick is you want to make sure they have, their general liability insurance, which is more than likely going to be required. If bonding is required, you need that documentation. If they have to have a license, which electrician usually does, you want to make sure you have all that documentation as well and support whatever the requirements are in that regard. And then you want to make sure you're adhering to compliance requirements. For example, a compliance requirement could be that they say you must have a project manager on site at all times, anytime work is being performed. Well, then you need to make sure you have your PM on the site. It could be a site where they say, you just have to have a superintendent. So then you want to make sure you either have a superintendent or a project manager on site at all times when work is being performed. It could be that the work requires you to have, 15 people doing the work, right? Because they figure 15 people, you can get the scope done in this amount of time, right? So if they say you have to have 15 workers, then you want to make sure you have 15 workers on site. And they're going to be able to see that, one, by if they do a walkthrough. Two, when you submit your documentation and request payment, they'll see through the certified payroll how many people you had working on a daily. So you want to make sure you're compliant with that, and just any other compliance requirements that they may have. Sometimes on construction projects, say you're working within a building and they have people still working in the building as well. They may say you have to clean up, behind you every day to a certain standard. So you want to make sure you're doing that. So whatever the compliance requirements are, you just want to make sure you're adhering to those, and that your subcontractors and vendors or whoever you have coming on site, they're adhering to those same compliance requirements. Now, here's one of the biggest mistakes contractors make. And this is assuming everyone involved understands the contract. And that is not always the case. That is why I am hopefully drilling these key elements into you guys so that you kind of get an understanding of what you should be looking for, what will be required of you, so that you can execute successfully. And that's why a kickoff meeting is so important, because it creates alignment and helps prevent misunderstandings later. So for example, when I say kickoff meeting and a planning meeting, this is something that's the prime that you may do internally within your office, right, to get prepared for the project. However, as you're bringing on your subcontractors, you should be having kickoff meetings with them as well. Now, you as the owner, you may not necessarily sit in on all of those kickoff meetings. That's where your project manager would come in play, or that superintendent, just depending on what role they play. But I would always have some type of kickoff meeting with everyone involved as it comes to their work. So before they start performing work, making sure we're all in alignment, we're all on the same page, we all understand the scope, requirements, compliance, documentation, how you're going to get paid, when you're going to get paid, all of that. You want to just make sure once work starts, smooth sailing. The second process is your schedule management. Every project should have a clear plan for tracking milestones. Every project. And not only your milestones, but your deliverables, deadlines, as well as your project progress. Here's what happens without schedule management. Delays will increase, costs will rise, and your customer confidence will decrease. If you're not watching the schedule, that's where the delays will come in. Because sometimes you may see, maybe you have a delay, it rained today, so you couldn't work today. But as long as you stay on top of your schedule, you can probably make some adjustments to make sure you still hit the deadline of closing out the project on time. And not only that, closing it out within budget. Because if your schedule creeps, your cost is going to creep, and that means your profit is going to decrease. So you want to make sure you stay on top of the schedule, because that's where it all starts. Now, successful contractors, they review their schedules regularly, and they proactively address issues before they impact the project performance. And that's the key. Just think about it. If you're looking at your schedule on a weekly basis, you can see schedule creep coming in. Now, as the project manager, 9 times out of 10, especially on really large projects, they're probably looking at the schedule every day to some degree. I mean, at some point, you'll kind of know, for this week, we know what we got going on. And then as you're watching the work being performed and, how much work they're getting done on a daily basis, you'll see where issues may be coming up, if any, and then you can address those accordingly real time. Now, with that being said, you can see how important that project management role is. Now, projects oftentimes fail because information is not communicated effectively, which is the third process, communication management. Now, this includes communication throughout the entire project, but between these key players: your project managers, your field team, your subcontractors, your vendors, and your customers. How are you communicating? I'm really curious about that. So when you think about communication, this here is a very handy dandy. This is an iPad, but any type of tablet is a great resource to have when you're in the field working, because you can communicate with the back office. So if you're not up to standards, well, let me not say standards, but with today's time, as far as technology, I would really encourage you to get on board with that. Email, being able to communicate from the field to the office quickly, right? Being able to talk to your customers, to your vendors. If you see something being delayed, or maybe they deliver something that's not what the order said, you can pull it up real quickly right here on your tablet, or if you have a laptop, something like that, and you can kind of address that issue real time while the delivery person is there, or something like that. So I want you to think about how you communicate in that regard, but also what is the communication process between your project managers, your field people, as well as your back office. How do you guys communicate? Do you just send an IM and wait for a response? Do you send an email, wait for a response? Do you pick up the phone? Like when it's really, really urgent? How do you handle these issues? How do you communicate what needs to be communicated to make sure the project is staying on schedule and within budget? Establishing communication processes will help ensure that all people involved are working from the same information and expectations. So as things change, think about what is that communication process. You have a change order. How do you communicate that to everyone involved? You ran out of supplies. Unforeseen changes need to be made to the project. Maybe, you couldn't have foreseen some of the damage done if you're doing a remodel until you get in there and tear down the drywall. How will you communicate what you found? I want you to let me know this one in the comment. I am curious to know, what is the biggest challenge that your company faced after contract award? Let me know in the comments. And if you're not working on contracts right now, let me know pre-award, before you win a contract. Maybe you're looking for contracts right now. What is your biggest challenge? Let me know in the comments. Documentation is important across the board, not only in government contracting, but in contracting as a whole. And that is our fourth process, documentation management. Now, this includes your daily reports. So again, remember, your daily reports will tell you what work was done. It also will tie into your schedule. So you see why it's so important to get daily reports. Not only that, it'll let you know compliance-wise if you had the right number of workers on the project. So make sure you're getting those daily reports. And then let's talk about communication with that. How do you submit the daily reports? How often are you submitting them? I mean, they're called daily reports. So are you submitting them to the back office daily or once a week? Change orders is another thing that is a documentation. And not only filling out the change order, but any supporting documentation that you should have to support that change. And within that change, is there a cost involved? So you need to support that as well if you have a change order. And then how does that go back to your customer? Like, does the PM send it directly to the customer? Does it have to go back to the back office first? What does that process look like? You also have your invoices. Okay, now think about invoices. Invoices are coming in, meaning that you need to pay the invoices, as well as the invoice going out to your customer where they are paying you. What does that invoice flow look like? Now that ties into your accounting department. So you just want to make sure, what does that look like? Like, when do you send out invoices? Because if you don't send the invoice, you don't get paid. So you want to make sure you're sending out your invoices in a timely fashion so that you're getting paid on time. And with your invoices, again, whatever supporting documentation is required, you want to make sure you have that in that packet as well. But let's talk about when you're receiving invoices. How are those processed? What documentation do you require be submitted with your invoices that's coming in requesting payment from you? When do you process those invoices? When do you cut the checks? Right? Does the work that they perform have to be approved prior to payment? So think about what that process looks like for you and your company. Your meeting minutes. Now this is very, very important because you have your kickoff meeting, and then ideally, just depending on how big the project is, you may have monthly meetings with the owner, and then what is discussed in those meetings that may affect the contract, right? It could be a change in scope of work. It could be a change in schedule. So you want to make sure those meeting notes are disseminated to the right people, meaning they're getting the information from those meeting notes that apply to what they are doing. Compliance records, right? Remember, you're going to have compliance requirements. There's probably going to be some type of record documentation that you'll have to keep in regards to your compliance. So how are you maintaining that? Like we know, G&L, you're going to have general liability insurance throughout the project. So your subcontractor, same thing. So if they're, let's say the project starts September, and then in December, you notice that their general liability insurance expires. So in November, hopefully someone on your team is reaching out to them saying, hey, we notice this is expiring next month. Once you have the new certificate, the COI, please, submit it to us. And then of course in December, again, you can follow up on that. So how do you manage that? How do you track that to make sure you're staying on schedule with that and reaching out to them to get that new copy in case they just don't send it. Some will, definitely send it. Others may forget. And so you want to make sure you have something internally that you're requesting the required documentation. And then contract correspondence. Anything that's related to the contract as far as correspondence, how are you tracking it, keeping up with it, right? It's great to have a phone conversation. We talked about that earlier here in this video, where if it's really, really urgent, you may pick up the phone. But even in doing that, you still want to follow it up with something in writing, whether it's an email, making sure everybody is on the same page and they're aware of what that phone conversation entailed, and we're in agreement with moving forward with XYZ or whatever it is. So even if you have a conversation via in person or phone or something like that, that's great. Still make sure you have some type of documentation to back it up. Let me just say, poor documentation can create disputes. I can't tell you how many times where you could even be sitting in the meeting and agree upon something, and then later on down the road, somebody don't remember what was said or agreed upon. So that's why it's important to get it in writing. So I always like to say, if you don't have it in writing, it didn't happen. So not only it can create disputes, poor documentation can also create payment delays, and who wants that? As well as increased risk, and definitely don't want that. Like, what if the bonding limit was $100,000 for a company and you did a change order, and now their scope of work is going to be $150,000. Well, the bond only says $100,000. So who's on the line if something goes haywire above that amount? See why you got to keep it up with that documentation? So if it is not documented, it's very difficult to prove it later on. All right, the fifth thing is your performance tracking and control. Now, as contractors, you should regularly be monitoring your budget performance. Like, how are you managing the money? How are you tracking the money flow, not only for this project, but for all of your projects, and then as a company as a whole? What does the budget look like for this particular project? What did you budget your cost to be? Because you need to manage that, because that will affect your bottom line profits. And you want to be really good at your budget, because that in turn correlate with your number that you provide, or that you bid, or that you propose for that particular opportunity. So you want to make sure those budget numbers are good. You also want to monitor your labor productivity, because remember, that can affect your schedule. Not only, are they working at a pace that they should be working or that you expect them to work, as well as do they have the number of workers that is required. So that's why it's important, when your subcontractors are on site a lot of times, to have that project manager or superintendent. So one, they can make sure enough workers are on site and that they're not goofing off, but that they're working as they should, because we have a schedule to keep to. All right, as well as your contract compliance. You want to make sure you're tracking that, and we kind of talked about that earlier. What system do you have in place to track your contract compliance requirements, as well as your quality requirements? On larger project, you're going to have OSHA requirements as well. How are you tracking those requirements? And then your project profitability. Now, this goes into your schedule, your budgets. All of that is going to impact your profitability. So I hope you're tracking that like consistently. And you can't do it from the back office. That's why it's important that you have that communication management process in place from the field to the back office. The goal is always to identify the problems early while there is still time to correct them. Too many companies wait until towards the end of the project to start looking at the performance. And by then, the damage has already been done. That's why it's important to review the schedule at a minimum on a weekly basis. Now, let me share a few common contract execution mistakes. And these are just some of the ones that I see. So hopefully by me sharing these with you, you can kind of avoid some of these. So the first thing is the weak project planning. And I don't think I need to get into that. We talked about how important planning is, the kickoff meeting, and all of that documentation and monitoring, right? Another thing I see as an issue, a mistake that's being made, is poor communication. The third thing, inadequate documentation. You're documenting some things, but not everything. Lack of schedule control. Who's controlling the schedule? Now, this is a huge one. Failure to monitor profitability. Even if you're doing all the other things, a lot of times companies let the profit monitoring part slip. You have to monitor that as well. And then lastly, waiting too long to address issues. These problems often lead to cost overruns, which we don't want that. Compliance issues, which creates another problem. Customer dissatisfaction and reduced profit. Cost overruns and reduced profits, that hurts you. Compliance issues and customer dissatisfaction, again, it's going to hurt you, but also it hurts the customer, and then in turn, they may not award you future contracts. So do you see why winning the contract is only the beginning? The companies that consistently grow and scale are the ones that build strong execution systems and project management processes. They understand that project success depends on much more than technical expertise. I mean, everybody know how to do the work. It's usually the back office is where they fail. And I always say, don't let your back office prevent the success in your front office. Being successful as a contractor, here's what it requires: planning, communication, documentation, accountability, and ongoing performance management. So if you're a construction company or a contractor looking to strengthen your contract execution or get into government contracting, improve profitability, reduce risk, focus on building the systems that support successful project delivery, and you found this video helpful, make sure you subscribe for more content on government contracting, construction operations, contract management, and project execution. Now, here's the thing. If you're serious about growing your company, I've created the Contract Readiness Execution Checklist to help you identify the financial, operational, and compliance gaps that can hurt your profitability after award. You can download it by using the link below. All right, thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye for now.